I wanted to be here. I'm not an expert in this field, but this is something as Minister of Finance I have to deal with almost on a daily basis, this intersection between public policy and conservation issues. And even in my past career, this was a healthy tension I had to deal with, and I hope going forward, given Nepal's latent strengths, this is a harmonious balance that we need to strike going forward, and it's wonderful to interact and be with this community. Now, Nepal stands before this distinguished gathering not as a newcomer to the conservation table, but as a nation whose relationship with its forests, rivers, and wild species is woven into the very fabric of its languages, cultures, and livelihoods. With over 23% of our land under protected areas, community forests covering more than 15% of our forest estate, and total forest cover now reaching 46% of our landmass, a remarkable reversal in a region where deforestation has been the dominant trend. Nepal demonstrates that conservation ambition and community empowerment are not competing goals, they are the same goal. This did not happen through enforcement from above. It happened because Nepali communities, farmers, indigenous peoples, women's groups, and forest user committees were trusted as stewards of their own landscapes. Nepal's conservation model is, at its heart, a community-authored model. Decades of political courage and institutional investment have produced results the world is still trying to replicate. Let me say something that is rarely uttered in rooms like these. Nepal and its communities have spent decades adapting to other people's paradigm shifts. We went from colonial era forest conservation, in which local people were displaced in the name of preserving wildlife for the hunting pleasure of others, to community-based conservation, to ecosystem services, to integrated landscape approaches, to nature-based solutions, to biodiversity credits. Each framework arrived largely from elsewhere, carrying its own assumptions about what nature is, who has the right to define it, and how it should be governed. Each time, our communities, Tharo fisherfolk, Sherpa yak herders, Gurung pastoralists, Raute forest dwellers, were asked to translate their centuries of accumulated ecological knowledge into a vocabulary not their own. This is not ingratitude toward international science or global frameworks, which have genuinely contributed. It is an acknowledgement of what philosophers call epistemic justice, injustice, the systematic undervaluing of knowledge produced outside dominant centers of inquiry. Nepal's communities have not merely coexisted with nature, they have co-evolved with it. The Tharu people maintained Chitwan's grasslands for millennia before any scientific management plan existed. The Sherpa communities of Khumbu developed altitude-specific agro-pastoral systems of extraordinary ecological sophistication. This knowledge is not folk wisdom. It is primary evidence, and it demands primary standing. Nepal's rich tapestry of over 123 living languages is not only a cultural asset, it is a biodiversity asset. The government of Nepal, therefore, asserts clearly, we welcome the world's best science and best practice. We will continue to honor our international commitments. Nepal is ready to exercise its epistemic sovereignty through policy, through curriculum, through governance structures, and to ensure that its communities' ways of knowing, doing, and being in relationship with nature are treated as foundational, not supplementary. Across Nepal's buffer zones in Bardia, in Chitwan, Langtang, Sagarmatha, it is rural and indigenous communities who live closest to nature and bear its heaviest costs. Nepal's vision is unambiguous. Local communities should have gainful, dignified, and meaningful employment, rooted in and generated by their landscapes, not as laborers in extremely designed ecotourism ventures, not as recipients of conservation stipends, but as leaders of wildlife monitoring and research, of forest carbon accounting, of ecological restoration enterprises, of biodiversity-linked financial products, of cultural and natural heritage tourism on their own terms. Nepal's 23,000 plus community forestry user groups are not just conservation delivery mechanisms. They are the embryo of a new biodiversity economy, one that generates prosperity for the communities that produce it. Conservation finance that does not reach with tangible and measurable impact, the Tharu woman managing a community forest in Bardia, the Sherpa youth monitoring snow leopard corridors in Khumbu, the Tamang beekeeper sustaining pollinator populations in Lantan is finance that has not yet done its job. Nepal respects science. We have benefited enormously from the partnership of international researchers, and we welcome continued scientific cooperation with full enthusiasm. Some of the world's most consequential ecological research has been conducted on Nepali landscapes, on glacier dynamics, snow leopard behavior, community forestry outcomes, high altitude medicine, and migratory bird ecology. But we must be candid about a pattern that has persisted too long. Nepal's mountains, rivers, species, and communities have frequently served as field sites for science whose data, publications, and intellectual products flow primarily to institutions located elsewhere. Biological specimens collected in Nepal's forests, hydrological data from our river systems, genomic information from our endemic species, ethnobotanical knowledge documented from our indigenous communities, these have accumulated in international databases and academic journals to which Nepal has limited access and over which it has minimal governance authority. This is an extractive model of scientific cooperation, and Nepal respectfully but firmly calls for its replacement with a reciprocal model. We call for full data sovereignty, indigenous data sovereignty, co-authorship and institutional partnership, and open access provisions. Nepal has its own tested, community-driven, evidence-based solutions to offer. Our community forestry governance model, our integrated conservation livelihood approaches, our wildlife coexistence frameworks, these have produced measurable, peer-reviewed, and internationally recognized results. Nepal does not only need to learn from the world needs to learn from us as well. I want to close with a story that is both historical and contemporary, and that captures in a single arc the transformation Nepal has lived and is still living. Just over a century ago, the lowland forests of the Tarai were a hunting ground for empire. In December 1911, King George V came to Chitwan and shot in a single royal shikar 39 tigers, 18 rhinos, and 4 bears in 10 days. The tradition continued for decades. As recently as 1961, within the lifetimes of many people in this room, King Mahendra of Nepal hosted a royal shikar in the same forests, a hunt so grand it was immortalized in print. The communities who lived there, the Tharu people, whose ancestors had managed those landscapes for centuries, were beaters, camp servants, and bystanders in the theater of someone else's dominion over their land and its creatures. Today, the same landscape in Chitwan National Park, the centerpiece of Nepal's internationally recognized conservation effort. Nepal has invested enormously in wildlife conservation, in ranger capacity, habitat management, and community buffer zones. Tiger numbers have increased, but in this room, among this audience, I will not pretend the story is simple, or that the numbers alone are the cause for uncritical evaluation or uncritical celebration. A conservation strategy that grows animal populations without commensurate investment in habitat quality, landscape connectivity, and community coexistence is an incomplete strategy. Nepal knows this. The scientists in this room know this. What we owe the communities bearing the costs of that incompleteness is not self-congratulation, it is honest reckoning and accelerated action. But the story is not simple. Those same Tharu communities are now living with the daily reality of human-tiger conflict, with livestock killed, livelihoods threatened, and in some years, lives lost. They have gone from being marginalized bystanders under colonial dominion to being frontline stewards under conservation mandates. They have limited power to design. The paradigm shifted from extraction to protection, but the fundamental question of who decides was never fully resolved in their favor. That question must now be resolved between King Mahendra's 1961 royal hunt in these same forests and today's Congress is a span of just 65 years, less than a human lifetime. In that time, the Tarai has gone from being a stage for imperial spectacle to a front line of global conservation. That transformation is real, and what Nepal must build in the next 65 years with the communities of Chitwan, Bardia, Khumbu, and every landscape in between is as genuine architects of their own future, not subjects of someone else's conservation vision, is even more consequential. The government of Nepal, therefore, makes the following commitments and calls. We will step up state capacity for biodiversity governance. We will place communities at the center of conservation decisions. We will assert Nepal's vision in international biodiversity and climate finance negotiations. On climate finance and biodiversity, there's a bold proposition to be made. Nepal calls for a new instrument, sovereignty-linked biodiversity bonds, through which biodiversity-rich nations issue sovereign debt instruments with interest rates structurally linked to verified biodiversity outcomes. The communities of Nepal, human and non-human, present and future, did not create the global biodiversity emergency, but they are living at its frontier, and they have been doing so with remarkable creativity, resilience, and grace. It is time for them to do so on their own terms, informed by their own knowledge, empowered by their own institutions, and supported by a global financial architecture that finally genuinely honors what they protect. Nepal is ready for that world. We invite this Congress and the global community it represents to help us build it. Thank you so much.